ladies and gentlemen, this is the panel on digital democracy. I will go and introduce everyone. We had kind of people clapping in between the introductions, but because we have so much to get through and it's such a meaty topic, I'll ask you to clap very loudly at the end, please. So I'll start from the very end there. We've got Leslie Miller, who is the Vice President of Government Affairs and Public Policy from Google. Thank you very much for joining us today. Next, we have Daniel Brown, who's the Head of Cabinet of Ms. Věra Jourová, Vice President of the European Commission for Values and Transparency from the Czech Republic. Then we have Otakar Foltín, who is, Otakar Foltín, the Strategic Communications Coordinator and from the Government of the Czech Republic. And we have Christian David, who's the Chairman of the Board, Institute for Freedom and Democracy from Romania. And finally, last but not least, Oreste Policino, the Professor of Constitutional Law from the University of Bocconi from Italy. Welcome. Everyone, please give them a good, big round of applause. I have a lot of questions prepared for you, but I also really want you guys to get involved. You have the QR code for Slido, just point your phone or tablet at it, and please go away, because it's important to have this as interactive as possible, as democratic as possible, or at least in the way that the ancient Greeks intended it to be. I would like to kind of move on to the first question, which is relating to the recent major election that we have just had in Europe. It has just taken place. There's some clear trends that we can see. And I'm just curious about how you feel that the rise of digital technologies has impacted the whole election process on the whole. What you feel that the roles of the private versus the state sector are in kind of tackling these new digital trends in this regard, and how it impacts the way that we vote and engage. A nice kind of easy question to launch us into it, and I will leave it up to whoever wants to pick up the baton. Or I can point fingers. Oh, yes, please. Yeah, fantastic. Thank you.
I will break the ice, if you allow me. I'm Christian David. I'm the chairman of the board of the Institute for Freedom and Democracy in Romania. And as we are quite involved in the electoral process and in the European elections that took place recently, I will make two very sharp observations with regard to technology. First is about the electoral process as such, the voting process, which from our experience, it was not giving the results as expected and to the capacity of the technology as of today. Meaning that electronic vote could have easier the process and could offer a higher participation rate. So I hope that the next European elections, which are to be held in 2029, will be on an electronic platform that will offer the European citizens the possibility to participate directly in the voting process. With regard to the electoral process, and especially with the campaign, the second remark I would like to make is regarding to the manipulation and disinformation throughout the technology, and primarily to some AI products which were offered in the social media networks as statements, testimonies of the participants in the electoral race, which were fake, which were inducing huge confusion amongst the public, because you were waking up with a very special and spectacular testimony on a social media of one of the major competitors, which proved to be fake, and by noon that was gone. But the impact in the public to a certain point was already done. So these are the two sharp observations to my experience in this campaign, not in general. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Would anyone like to react? Please, Leslie.
Hi. Is it on? Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm Leslie, and I lead public policy for YouTube. And to your original question, I don't think it's for me amongst these esteemed panelists to weigh in on the sentiment regarding the outcome of the election here across Europe. But on behalf of YouTube, a few things that I would just like to share and some of the early learnings that we've seen based on the parliamentary elections, which is for YouTube, it is a top priority that we show up and that we are a net contributor in the democratic process of elections. And as such, we've put a number of things in place, and I would be curious in some of the details, maybe you have some insights into what you saw in terms of how tech companies were used both in a positive way and where there were areas of improvement. And for YouTube, we look at elections in a number of ways. First is, what won't we tolerate on the platform? So we have a set of content policies as it relates to election-related misinformation. So content that tries to lead people to be misled in terms of where to vote, how to vote, the eligibility of candidates, that content is not allowed on our platform. We remove it. But in addition, we understand, and this was shared already earlier in this conversation, I heard it from the speaker just prior, which is, but foreign attempts to sow discord in the integrity of elections, that is also something in addition to the policies we have where we will remove content. We have an organization at Google called the Threat Analysis Group that works to identify patterns of behavior from nefarious actors, including governments such as the Chinese government, the Russian government, et cetera, where when we spot this activity across Google, we'll terminate their accounts. We will make sure that we are getting in front of any one government's attempts to A, hide who they are, and B, sow discord into any other country's basically overall dialogue. So we remove content that violates our policies, we terminate accounts that attempt to sow discord from foreign adversaries, and we also want to make sure that we're raising up what we call authoritative information. So my hope is if any of you used YouTube as a means to learn about the elections, that you were seeing content from authoritative sources, oftentimes news outlets and/or information panels from in-country authoritative sources to share information, again, where to vote, how to vote, but also the outcome of the election. So we feel it's been a top priority for us. Significant number of citizens around the globe have been going to the polls. We have not seen the volume of the concerns that were raised going into this year around topics like deepfakes. We just haven't seen the volume that people were concerned about, though any one deepfake could have a material impact. But it is a number one responsibility for us in terms of making sure that we are a net contributor to the electoral process. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Oh yes, please, and then you afterwards.
Go ahead.
No, absolutely.
You're older.
Absolutely.
It's a gentleman's standoff, yes.
Good morning, thank you. I was inspired by the remarks to make a couple of mine then. First of all, these elections, you could see that the role of social media and online platforms is growing. That's a clear trend. We have people in the European Parliament who don't even have a party, they just have a YouTube channel. And I think that's new, and that's a trend that we have to take into account. And that also increases the responsibility of those online platforms in the election process. A bit too early to assess what happened in the elections. We'll still be doing a proper assessment in the European Commission, but the very preliminary signals we get are that there was no major unexpected huge smoking gun, and that the indeed intensity of deepfakes and the very new technologies maybe did not materialize. And we can discuss whether that's because for the malicious actors the elections were not so important, or whether we were well prepared and the level of awareness was much higher than before. But overall it seems that online platforms, including YouTube, were geared up quite well. and we were much better equipped as a society than 5 years ago. I think pre-bunking, talking about this, raising the level of awareness without scaring off people also helps. At the same time, we did see an elevated level of disinformation in the 3 to 4 weeks before the elections. That comes out very clearly from the data from the European Digital Media Observatory. And again, it's very difficult at this point to assess to what degree this was foreign interference, and we should have no illusions about the intentions of Kremlin, and having the information space increasingly a fundamental issue for national security. There are, of course, domestic proxies to save time, useful idiots. There are political motives, there are economic motives, so I think these we need to get deeper into. As for the platforms, I like the division of promoting trustworthy information about the election process and then reacting to risks and the threats, in other words, content moderation. There, again, it seems that platforms, also through the codes that we agreed on, were better equipped than last time. We do get data. I don't know if you saw the Maldita study, a Spanish fact checker, that still content moderation is not so good across all languages. That still there are big gaps. So this is something that is a continuing, I would say, joint exercise. I mean, the issue is so complex that the response has to be complex. One last remark, and I know that's not your intention, but over-focusing in a way on the elections would be underestimating the problem of the information disorder, because the effects of the information disorders and of foreign interference and information manipulation, yes, that's in the elections. Those actors harvest the efforts in a way, but the effect is this long-term undermining of information integrity, with AI potentially increasingly having what Ivan Krastev calls paranoid citizen. Do I even believe anything I see? So, but I'm sure we'll get to that. Thank you.
Absolutely. You just foreshadowed my next question. We're connected telepathically. Thank you. Please, you wanted to have a remark as well.
Thank you very much, and I think I'm happy that Daniel spoke before me, because in a way he gave me the possibility to enhance his message from different angle. It's a constitutional angle. So basically, it's very timing today, the debate, also because yesterday, as you might have seen, there was a report by NewsGuard according to which Russian disinformation narrative has infiltrated generative AI, and NewsGuard has found that leading chatbots repeat fabricated narrative from state-affiliated sites, clearly hidden as local news outlets. This is from a global point of view. What's happening in Europe is different. Different from many reasons. One is that YouTube and NewsGuard signed the code of practice against information. I was so lucky with the great support of Daniel at the European Commission and the Vice President Jourova to guide the exercise of writing of the code of practice against disinformation, where the basis is trust. Trust, I think it's a crucial keywords in the electoral moment, because if you don't trust digital agora, if you don't trust what's happening there, it's clearly a way to escape from duty and right for the citizen, that is the right to vote. So I think this is the first thing that is crucial, and in a way Europe is leading in this sense. And I remember the first strategy in 2018, it was very minimalist, meaning we do not have any legal basis in the treaty for fighting against disinformation. And so there was basically a totally self-regulation approach that was a failure. The 2018 Code of Practice, it's a so-called Code of Practice because it was missing even the KPIs. So basically, we tried to work with all the participants in order to do something that is moving very slowly, I don't want to appear too legalist, from self-regulation to co-regulation. In this Digital Services Act, it's a very important traveling compass because it's a transformation machine that can lead from the self-regulation to co-regulation. What does it mean in few words? It means that in order to have effective legislation, it's very important the public-private debate. It's very important the know-how of the industry, but it's also very important the enforcement by public powers. No? And so this is, I think, it's a good cocktail in Europe. If you think what's happening, is my last word, the United States, because I've been for the last year as NYU as a Fulbright scholar, there is a totally different situation for many reasons. But I will just mention two. The first one, that the issue is not always related to fundamental rights and, let's say, pluralism, but it's about I would say, the nightmare of external interference, as we heard before, in the electoral process. And basically, so this means it's a national security-based and non-fundamental rights-based. Then there is a second issue, that freedom of speech and Her Majesty's First Amendment doesn't allow any attempt to even not regulate, but touch the field of disinformation. And I will end with just a footnote. In June, basically in 2 weeks, there will be discussed in front of Supreme Court a case that in Europe will never be a case. Basically, according to some applicants, the fact that Biden administration simply warned the platform that in this period it could have been very dangerous to keep online disinformation. This, according to some applicants, it's a violation of free speech. Biden versus Missouri. You understand that if this is a starting point, and I hope the Supreme Court will not say this, will not conclude on this, it's very difficult to even think to something that will go beyond self-regulation. But they want to go beyond, but they are in a way slave of their inner contradiction. I'm not saying that Europe is a paradise. I'm saying that in Europe it's a good model to follow, but Bruxelles effect should be taken seriously, but with moderation, because then the digital imperialism is something else.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Does anyone else have? Yes, please, Otakar.
Just a small remark, because I have the advantage that nearly everything what is quite important was already said, so I nearly agree with everything. But what is quite necessary to mention is that even though we understand what is the problem and the problem was defined, we don't do enough to resist the negative changes in information environment. We know that the frustration, hatred, and fear is spreading much faster than anything else. And of course, this has a deep impact on the way how we vote. So even though we know what is the problem, the governments of small Central and Eastern European countries have very small impact on the environment itself. Digital Service Act was already mentioned because it's the way how European Union may at least regulate the negative externalities of the current information environment, but small European countries have very limited instruments how to work with the problem. So the solution is on European level, and it's not enough to say what is the problem. We have to be much more active. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for those opening remarks, and you have opened up a whole can of worms with all the topics. Again, I would like to encourage everyone to join us in this debate, so please scan the Slido and ask your questions. I've got a kind of upcoming question exactly as Daniel foreshadowed, going a little bit wider, because we are talking about digital democracy, and if we look at what democracy actually means, it's from the Greek demos and kratos, which is the rule of the people. And if we look at people like Plato, who have written very dense texts like the Republic, the gist of it essentially is democracy is a rule of the people for the people, but the people are dumb. So he instead suggests a utopia that is governed by philosopher kings who basically make all the decisions. This idea of these historical utopias where basically society and the way it should be governed are dictated, that has happened and has been kind of studied for the last thousands of years. We have everything from Sir Thomas More's utopia, Campanella's The City of the Sun. We have Francis Bacon's New Atlantis. We have the dream of the Red Chamber from the Qing dynasty in China. So the ideas of how society ideally should be run have existed for centuries and millennia. We might think that this is just a historical quirk, but actually with the rise of technology like Web3 and blockchain, and this is, I sense, the kind of hunger for transparency, how decisions are made, how information is kept, these social experiments have actually started to take a whole new speed in recent years. We actually have organizations like BitNation, Aragon, DAOstack, 4Colony, Democracy Earth, Decentraland, the VC Nation, which is a nation state which functions entirely in the cloud and whose governance is based on blockchain. Now, we are seeing that there is an erosion of trust in the institutions. We have an erosion of trust in information. A majority of the information online is going to be created by AI. There are suggestions for transparency that, for example, when a piece of information is generated, there's a record on blockchain which says when it was generated, by whom, to show basically the provenance, the information provenance. There is push towards governments to adopt blockchain in decision-making so people can track back when something has happened or when an algorithm suggested a certain piece of content, why it did that. So there's this push towards transparency, explainability. And I'm just curious how you see that being adopted or reflected in your respective fields of work, and how you feel that concretely we can rebuild that trust with the people so that we don't have to go down the road of Plato. Please. Thank you. So
this will be the case when the question is much, much better than the reply. It's a great framing, and yeah, no, I don't want to spend too much time on the diagnosis, but I think it's important for the solution. I sometimes in my head I divide the problems into sources, channels, and targets, and we have malicious actors, as we mentioned here, that want to disrupt our society, don't like democracy. And increasingly it is seen as a security issue, these disorders. Then we have the channels and the technology that is being misused to manipulate. And with AI and new technologies, this becomes more scalable and less expensive. So that is an issue. And maybe an even bigger issue is that the information space is becoming, let's say, more instantaneous and more fragmented, while the Plato's democracy process is long and sequential. So it's not built for this kind of information environment. And when you have this model of matching user-generated content with engagement, and the predisposition of the targets of the people to interact more with negative and emotive news, you have research showing that. That's obviously an issue we have to deal with, and that is why we are working all together on guardrails. I don't believe that everything is caused by social media and by online platforms, but obviously, as Esther also mentioned, self-regulation is not possible, and we have to do more also as governments. There is one more associated issue, and that's declining trust not only in institutions but also in media as institutions in a way. When we are predisposed to in a way interact not with facts but with emotive news, well, the facts are precisely what the journalists are trained to give to people. So another issue for this agora and Plato's idea, the whole purpose of what we're doing, I think, is that we ensure there's this public debate free of manipulation that is either driven by the malicious actors or by the system that provides perverse incentives to promote divisive content. The solutions vis-a-vis social media and online platforms, to save time, are indeed transparency and due diligence. There is no other sector that self-regulates itself, like banking sector also needs to go through some due diligence and risk assessment and risk mitigation process, and to keep the space tidy in a way. So this is what we did with the Digital Services Act, but I would say the digital toolbook reflects that we rolled out in this mandate of the Commission, reflects the fact that this is really a multi-layered problem composed of the role for the governments, role for social media, role for educators, role for parents. So there are several pillars where we try to put the rights back into the digital space and where we try to return to the internet what the internet was first designed to do, and that is to bring more democracy, more conversations, more information, and this was a bit hijacked by the perverse incentive and by the malicious actors. So we have several pillars: protection of privacy with GDPR, we have protection of users' rights with the DSA, also saying what is illegal offline has to be illegal online, plus you need to look at the risks that your service is bringing to the society. You have the Media Freedom Act ensuring media independence. You have protection of competition to have contestable markets with the Digital Markets Act. You have the AI Act looking at high-risk use cases of AI in all of this. So there's a lot to be done, and one thing I've learned in the years that I've been working in this field is there's no silver bullet. We're living in a complicated world. We all have to add our hands to the fight. But I feel that there's a growing consensus that this design-led solution and not content, not looking at content from the side of governments, is something where everybody has an understanding we need to do to, I don't want to sound poetic, but to heal the information space a little bit.
Thank you very much. Please, Leslie.
I just wanted to go back to what you said, because I think it is, to me, I think one of the biggest challenges of our time is figuring out and defining what societal norms are when people spend a fair amount of their time online, but exist obviously offline in their communities, in their countries, in their regions, and what those societal norms should look like, and how online norms should reflect the societal norms. But how do you do that in a manner that embraces and respects the cross-border nature of the internet, which was a core pillar of the internet, which was to connect people? How do you do that in a way that can be cross-border? How do you create norms that allow for those that maybe historically have been disenfranchised and have access and opportunities to share a point of view that otherwise may not have been, they may not have been able to share, and or find their own form of community based on their intrinsic traits or protected groups. And so there's components. I'm actually quite optimistic about the role that technology will play in affording people to find their communities, to share perspectives. But I absolutely agree that it must be with a set of norms. And I really appreciate over the years the conversations that companies like YouTube and Google have had with governments and policymakers, because oftentimes what I have found is the best outcome for a framework is a multi-stakeholder approach. And it must be, no one company should assume that it has all the answers or should singularly dictate the terms. We benefit greatly from input and frameworks, not just from governments, but from civil society and organizations and experts. And I think we're still making our way through that as multi-stakeholders, but I have heard, and I very much agree with it and appreciate that, but over the last handful of years, there's been a lot of progress made. There's always more to do. It's actually, one would think that we could anticipate all the ways in which nefarious actors want to drive a particular agenda or narrative. And so for us, for tech companies, and again, I'll just speak for YouTube specifically, what we have found is investing in systems and practices is the best way to address new threats at scale quickly. Because if we're only focusing on what may be any one type of content, we're going to always be reacting to things. Whereas if we build the infrastructure with a sense of, we need to make sure at the end of the day we are being responsible, we are adhering to the frameworks and norms that have been developed through multi-stakeholder processes, that is a way in which people could come to and rely on tech as a means to build resilience, digital literacy, sort of reemerge trust in institutions, while also demonstrating repeatedly that the areas in which we won't tolerate, and something that I mentioned before in terms of adversarial foreign actors and things of that nature. So I just wanted to say that I very much appreciate the multi-stakeholder approach that has been had, particularly in Europe. I think it's made all of us better and more informed.
Thank you very much. Thank you. There's actually a question that relates to that. I'll get to you in a second, but maybe you could include this in your answer if relevant. How can the different stakeholders, which is the public, private, and academia, work together better on online safety and, frankly, transparency, and what are the key obstacles in that regard as well? So in the case that you weren't going to tackle that, that's absolutely fine, but just in reaction to your answer, that is definitely something that interests the audience as well.
Well, I will also come to that point. My intervention will complete the previous ones from the angle of democracy. This was an angle of technology, but I would return back to democracy and the fundamentals of democracy, which are based on citizens, society, and state or governments. So there is also a triangle, but this is a democratic triangle, which interferes in such way that is an organic transformation of all the three elements. And I think the major challenge to democracy this time, not a very specific issue related to democratic practice, but to democracy as a system, is the speed of transformation. Because the speed of transformation in technology is so fast and so massive in impact that the individual, the society, and even the state actors cannot follow. I would very much appreciate the capacity to anticipate the transformation, but as the judicial system in history was built on experience and not on forecast, I'm afraid it will be very difficult to keep on track with future. So my approach will be to be happy to keep on track with the present, because I think that is a very concrete element we need to deal with. And the challenge regarding to individuals and citizens is to be better informed and to know how to select the information. with regard to society, how to be active and participative, and to the governments, how to intervene. So my answer to this systemic approach is that, one, we need to be resilient. Second answer is education. And third answer is regulation. So that will be my definition in correspondence with the democratic system, not in correspondence with the technology or other actors which were described before. So it is resilience, which is both valid for individual society and state actors, education, which is valid primarily for citizens and community. That's why we speak about smart cities, smart communities, smarter, intelligent citizen. And thirdly, it is regulation, which comes on the state responsibility. So if these three elements will be organically connected, I think we will keep on track with the transformation. And I think, and I will conclude with that, the major challenge is to keep on track with a rapid and massive digital transformation, which impacts all society, economic, socially, politically, democracy, you name it, but nothing can escape from this fast-track transformation.
Thank you very much. Would you like to? Yes.
Thank you very much. Just a footnote to this. I think that we have some lessons that should be learned from the past. No? This is something that it happens, it's a kind of abuse narrative. AI and new technology should learn from the lesson and the mistake that's been done when the internet was born. But I just want to say something a little bit different. The issue related to which are the risks of automation emerged before AI explosion and before generative AI. I don't know if you remember March or April 2020. I'm sure you remember, because there were difficult periods for everybody, and also for clearly the platforms, and also for the workers of the platform that should have stayed home. No? And there was an abused, a simplified narrative according to which workers stayed home and information goes down. What does it mean? It means basically that the platform themselves learned, I think in that period, that it's always more important the human moderation, the human-based moderation. Automation, it's important, but it could not be clearly the only key. Then clearly AI amplified this problem because it's based on computer power, data, and automation. But we knew already that was something related to the center of the human, not in the corner, but as a basic of European democracy. No? This, I think, it's crucial. Now, how we can do it? It's not an easy answer, because if you look at the eye, it's clearly the automation system that is putting a little bit the human in the corner. Which could be the answer? The answer is, I think, the best practice that also industry is showing in order to focus, to invest on human moderation. Now there is another problem from a constitutional point of view. I think it's important. Who is the best human being equipped to do what Calabresi would call tragic choice, meaning balancing between fundamental rights? Should be a public power, it should be a private powers. This is not an easy question. Even the Court of Justice in the famous or infamous Google Spain in 2014, with a very good intention, meaning trying to let emerge a new right, the right to be forgotten, what it did, it was delegated to a private power the competence to balance between a right to be forgotten on the one hand, a right to be informed on the other. So if you look at also the DSA, with all the due difference, the risk assessment exercise is a difficult one, because it provides accountability, but it also provides clearly internal choice, internal balancing of private parties that in general, in a rule of law, are done by public authorities. I know that there are no other solution. I understand this best possible scenario in a realistic world, but we should be aware of the risks that maybe the industry didn't want to run, but they are forced to do on the one hand, but from the public institution there are not other possibility than cooperation. And then we come back to the key word, trust. Because if there is no trust between public and private, all this system, it's falling down. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Atakar?
I don't want to repeat my previous speech, but the basic idea is still the same. When we see that something is getting wrong, and it is, we see that our societies are going down in the understanding of positive values because of the, let's say, very low trust. And you mentioned that, and that is the problem because democracy is based on trust. And the basic question is, do we do enough for trust? We don't. When we will speak about AI, and I hope that we will, does the AI subject the right to vote? It doesn't. Definitely, I think that it's clear. But does AI the right for freedom of speech? It doesn't. But in the very near future, we will see that the majority, maybe more than 95% of information in the public domain will be generated by AI. And as I mentioned, we as a state, we don't have instruments because we don't have data. This is something that is crucial for any kind of governance or regulation. I know that regulation is ugly word, but we know that from 19th century industry has to be regulated, and we still have industry. So even though it's ugly word, we need it. And but when we want to regulate something, and DSA is something that is quite necessary, but it's not enough. But when we want to regulate something, we need to know what is the statistics, what are the big data, and so on. And when we speak for the government, we don't have anything like that. So when we want to do something positive, we need you. And this is something that is, let's say, deeply against the government mentality, that we need something from, let's say, non-public environment for our basic regulation. And this is something what is such strange change that mostly no governmental officials don't want to speak about that, because then we have to confess that we know just a little for any kind of, let's say, regulation or just a resolution. So we need a completely new model of cooperation with your company or with internet giants when we speak about the new information environment. And to be fair, we don't have nothing like that because our discussion is based, let's say, on our will, on your will, and or voluntary activity and on your social responsibility. But it's, to be fair, in business, social responsibility is something that is very expensive. So are we ready to pay for that? We don't know. And currently, we have only one thing which is completely sure, that we didn't do our job because the society is really going down. And we know that the situation will be worse in the next few, maybe 5, maybe 10 years. But Russians, and especially Chinese, know very well what is going on. And they have much better data, they have much better understanding of what's going on. So I don't want to be skeptic, but we have to change our basic understanding of the problem. And the current problem is, from the government level, we know nearly nothing.
Thank you very much. You mentioned AI, definitely. Again, thank you for foreshadowing the next part of the debate. Again, I'll do a slight introduction to the next segment because you had a lot of questions come in. I think that what we heard from all of your talks and contributions is that there is a huge schism in the fact that something's clearly wrong. right? We've established that something's not quite right, whether it's the mistrust of authorities, civilizational collapse, if you will, something's not quite right. And on the other hand, we have the desire to fix it, but we don't necessarily know how to do that. There's a few questions that actually allude to this. A lot of them link to the freedom of speech, again, to the concept of trust, and how to actually set the course in the right way so that the rules and regulations or next steps that we implement don't do more harm than good. So concretely, just so I can read your contributions, the most popular question was, how do you find balance between addressing the spread of disinformation while protecting freedom of speech, which again, since Magna Carta in 1215 has been a huge kind of cornerstone of Western democracy. How do you convince millions of EU citizens to trust? We talk about trust, but how do you actually force it upon people? Isn't this a sign of deteriorating governance? We also have, how should EU legislation be adapted to protect digital democracy and the most urgent steps to make? And something that is really interesting, and I think that kind of goes to the whole holier than thou sentiment that might have been echoed, is a recent Reuters journalistic investigation into how the Pentagon led a disinformation campaign against China, with the result being several thousands of Philippine deaths because it was an anti-vaxxing propaganda, basically. And it was fake news, it just happened to come from the Pentagon. So I think that us humans are irrational, scheming animals, regardless of which side of the political spectrum you're on. And we're also producing an unholy amount of data every day, every second. It's petabytes, huge amounts of data that are being produced, and we don't necessarily make the sense of it. We spoke about it a little bit yesterday with, for example, the health sector, where if you want access to your patient data, good luck, because one hospital has anywhere close to 10 to 15 databases, so it's difficult to even get access to very basic data that we're producing. And I would like to ask you, kind of synthesize all these questions and ask you, what are the next steps in terms of regulation? There has been the AI Act that has come in very recently, and I would like to be as concrete as possible, because there's people from the public sector, there's people from the private sector who are lost in the landscape. So what should they do in their respective companies or in their respective state sector departments to make sure that at least the transparency and the data integrity is as close as possible so that we can regain this trust of the people? Thank you very much. Thank you.
I'll actually weigh in on part of this, but I really am going to be interested in my fellow panelists' views on this. I actually think one of the things we could do is assess what has happened so far in 2024 as it relates to the elections that have already occurred. So there are so many citizens around the globe who are going to the polls in very large population countries. They've already gone through acts of elections, whether it is in India or Indonesia. There's just so many countries that have already made their way through this year where people were suggesting, including we were making sure inside the company we were prepared for the concerns that, oh my gosh, in a year of significant elections, it just happens to coincide with the emergence of step change in technology with Gen AI. And is anybody prepared for this? It could have, there was concerns about how cataclysmic it may be. Now, we certainly have another 6+ months to make our way through. There's multiple other elections at the national and local levels I am aware of across Europe, but also in other countries. But I'd actually encourage us to contemplate what has potentially worked well so far as it relates to preserving a core, one of the most core components of a democracy, which is the act of elections. What were the positive components? We can learn from it. I think, Daniel, you referenced a couple of things. It was a framework that was put together in advance. It's not certainly limited to what the companies may have done better than years past. It's certainly because, again, of what other parts of the core pillars of society have put in place. But we're only halfway through a really pivotal year, and I would encourage us to take stock of not just where there is room for improvement, but also what may have actually worked well that we could stare at and learn from that perspective as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I'll try to be a good panelist and answer concretely three things that you mentioned. And I really want to address the issue of free speech. That seems to be quite important, I think in the Czech Republic much more than elsewhere. And a couple of remarks. I think doing nothing and letting the information space be manipulated is not freedom of speech. That's my first remark. Second, Mr. Foltin is saying this is not enough. We have other people saying you're censoring and pressuring the companies, you're doing too much. So there's no absolute, I mean, we're on the frontiers of balancing various fundamental rights, and this will be difficult, and this is always going to be iterative. The overall, I think, consensus is we have to do more, and we built, I believe, a good toolbox that now needs to be implemented. And it's pretty fresh. Yeah? I'll say a few words about the DSA as well. The third remark, and that relates also to your question or the remark on, or somebody's remark on AI and freedom of speech. The right to say something is a fundamental right in the Charter, but the content being distributed and amplified through algorithms virally to the society is not a fundamental right. It's basically a business choice of the service provider. So I think we should always keep this in mind. I think the debate will be about what impact AI has on various rights and freedoms. I think in the end we have to come to the conclusion that AI as such doesn't have freedom of speech. But our approach, again, is not content-based. We didn't bring with the DSA or other things new divisions of what is illegal, what is not illegal. We're asking the companies to treat illegal content as illegal content is treated offline. There is no California 90s situation where internet is above the law. And then we basically, with the DSA, we say, especially if you're a very large online platform, you need to assess the risks. Is my platform safe for mental health of children? Is my platform safe for election integrity? There is now a legal obligation, it's fresh, so it needs to come to life, to assess and mitigate those risks. And besides that, the second type of obligation is to have a content moderation system to be able to react, to engage with the users. And we have in place these codes that Oreste worked on that bring together the platforms, civil society, the governments, and the media and technology providers to fill this with life, to have risk mitigation measures that are agreeable to all. I also agree fully with the resilience point, because maybe we focus too much sometimes on detection and the reactions. I mean, in the end, we're not going to have fake-free internet, and we need to inoculate the people to a new normal, which is simply a higher volume of false narratives and malicious actors that will try to game the system and the environment. On AI, I think the problem is twofold. One, on the production side, so scalable and very cheap and personalized disinformation being produced that is indistinguishable to the people to recognize that this is not genuine content, and then the distribution aspect again. And that's, I think, a big responsibility of the platforms. There I see some positive movement. There again are codes. There was a Davos meeting, I think, in January, which YouTube also signed up to, and Microsoft and others, where there is a pledge to label and watermark AI, which I think is going to be extremely difficult for text and audio and video, but I think that looking at content provenance and trustworthiness of sources is the basis for whatever we do next. So I don't want to predict what happens in terms of legislation. Personally, I think we should now focus mainly on enforcing the legislation we have, and we have to serious investigations on X and TikTok, and you will see that this will create, I think, new norms, and this will move things. But I think we may move towards looking deeper into content provenance and this labeling and letting not only people understand why they see what they see, but also the governments to be able to understand what's happening in the information space.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yes, you wanted to go next.
Yeah, thank you. And I would like just to add something that might sound a little bit stupid, banal, maybe it is, but it's related to the constitutional framework in Europe. Because in Europe, we have European values, we have common constitutional traditions. I believe in common constitutional tradition. I don't believe in Europe as a fortress and not a digital fortress. For sure, Europe needs to have interconnected bridge, but we should focus on European constitutional values. And if we look at the European constitutional values, we discover something very simple. Freedom of speech can be exercised, but cannot be abused. We have this concept, it's not so complicated, it's called abuse of rights, that is in the Charter of Fundamental Rights, in the European Convention, is absolutely a constitutional blasphemy in the United States. What does it mean? It means simply that there is a codification of limits when you speak not only of freedom of speech, but every other fundamental right as as a codified limitation. What does it mean? Something very clear, obvious, that there is no right that is absolute right, but there is an exercise of balancing. How you do it? You have, again, a roadstar, Article 53 of the European Charter of Fundamental Rights, principle of proportionality. So it should be the less restrictive alternative test. How I can restrict that right in a way that I restrict at least the other conflicting rights. So we have this constitutional framework in Europe, and we should be faithful to this framework. It's obvious that in the United States we need a transatlantic bridge. This is obvious. How we build a transatlantic bridge? Also in the United States something is changing. Basically, nobody believes in a pure free marketplace of ideas. What does it mean? It means something that was very, let's say, à la mode last centuries, that in order to have the most competitive markets, it's important to inject false and true ideas. And then the market itself will have the possibility to heal, to correct. We do not believe in the fairy tales anymore. But also the United States do not believe in the fairy tales anymore. This does not mean an intrusive approach of public powers. This means, first of all, a trust between public and power, and maybe co-regulation. But again, starting with the European constitutional values, because we cannot betray that values, but we not also build a fortress without interconnected bridge. Why? Because otherwise we have a legislation that maybe is hypertrophic, maybe not, but for sure it might not be very useful because it's not effective. The enforcement gives the measures of how a legislation is useful. It's not how well written it is, but how enforced in a truly way it is. This is the degree in which you measure the impact of a legislation in Europe and outside Europe. Bruxelles effect overloaded.
Thank you very much. I'd like to specify my first question to Christian and Otakar as well. There are still questions coming in. How can we strengthen people's confidence in the system? Is there any plan how to deal with this problem of basically the mistrust on when a piece of information is let through and when it's not, how to balance kind of freedom of speech and regulation? It's interesting because Web 2 also, thanks to recommendation algorithms, has slipped into the sense that attention equals value, not necessarily that value equals value. And we are living in a bit of a technological crisis in that sense, is that you can post rage content, like rage bait content online, and you're going to get hateful clicks and hateful comments, but you've got to get them, and you're going to be bumped up the algorithm. So what are the regulations and what are the next steps that we can build in terms of transparency or education, which you mentioned, which is a fantastic point, to make sure that people know why they're being served the information that they're being served and that nothing is being withheld from them, because that uncertainty is then a breeding ground for conspiracy theories, etc. So how do we deal with this information provenance that was already fantastically mentioned by Daniel?
Well, I will reiterate that I come from the Institute for Freedom and Democracy, and I will not abandon that for any regulation theory. I do respect and accept theory. Regulation. We all live our lives under certain regulation, but we do not need to focus on regulation. Because once we focus on regulation, then who sets the limit and the border to the freedom of speech? And it's not about only freedom of speech, how about freedom of conscience? I mean, when and who decides what is right or what is wrong? Who decides what is truth or not truth? That is the question, which is about morality, it's about ethics. So when we talk about regulation, we need to also to consider who does this regulations, who are the invested people to set these regulations, and how do they represent the truth, which is a very philosophical question. I know that might not answer the very technical and concrete questions which are posed, but finally this is how it was in the humanity history. It was always the same. Now we have a different challenge. In the Inquisition time, science was forbidden because it was not a factor of progress seen by a part of the leading of the society. So what is now going to happen with this? My answer is simple. Confusion is clear. We do not have a very clear set of regulations because we do not know what the future brings in a very exact sense, and we do not have the exact institutions which are empowered by the same people to defend their freedom of speech and of conscience. So just talking about regulation, I think it is leading nowhere, because we will be stuffed in a big picture of regulations, but people will still find their way. So what we need to understand that people are free, they are free to speak, they are free to think, and they are free to express. So somehow we need to handle with this reality. On the other side, from the democratic point of view, just talking about regulations is not a democratic process as such, to my understanding. We need also to balance and to have the set of norms which are regulated our physical life, transported into the virtual life. And in this way, we need to be resilient somehow. I do not believe that someone has a very clear answer to what future brings. What we need to be constantly educating and constantly adjusting and adapting ourselves to the new realities. Regulations should be a synergetic form of resulting from the intersection between individual, society, and governance. It is nobody a supreme force which will decide what is right and what is wrong. And in this sense, we need also to consider the geopolitical perspective. Because what is fake news in some part of the world, in other is not working, and what is an intention to manipulate in some part of the world, in other is not working. So we have to see the differences and the nuances. Because if you are in Republic of Moldova or in Romania, in the proximity of the war in Ukraine, you see completely different things that you see in Portugal or Spain, where you are not at all affected, directly, indirectly, yes, by the war consequences. So we need to be very nuanced, because it's a multifaceted problem. And I think there is not an answer, and I encourage everybody to enlarge the discussion and to put all these issues in front, and maybe we can organically create a common answer. But I don't believe there is one having the answer, as I don't believe there is only one having the truth.
Thank you very much. Otakar, and actually, Leslie, how we mentioned AI, and I'd really like to get closer to that topic. We had the AI Act that has taken place. We have kind of the requirements of the local versus global, both of businesses, but also kind of interpretations of historical events and social happenings, etc. How can we use AI to kind of balance those global versus local requirements of information and transparency, and yet enforce those regulations? Like, what is your opinion on that?
My view, and one that I know across Google and YouTube we actually firmly believe in, and if you were to see the things that we have even just rolled out as it relates to AI in the last 18 months since Gen AI became a topic at everybody's dinner tables, is AI can be used as a force of good to be responsible at scale. And an example of this is, and there was a comment earlier about perhaps maybe only humans may be the best at addressing content moderations, and humans play the most critical role. But to catch content at scale quickly before it causes harm, there is a reliance on classifiers, on machine learning and AI. So an example of this where I think AI can be a force for good in making sure that we are being responsible is for YouTube, when we update or expand or iterate our content policies. So the company's always had rules of the road, things we will not tolerate on our platform. But those content policies are not meant to be static. They have to be agile to adapt to the landscape around us. So when we are reviewing those content policies and determining whether or not they're fit for purpose, that is absolutely a human exercise. But in order for us to have some level of precision about actually catching that content on the platform effectively, we rely on machine learning. We rely on AI, where the humans have created the definitions, the enforcement guidelines, the content policies. We move it to machines to catch the content at scale. We bring back with a wide net the content, and then humans review it to see if there's precision in the way that the machines and AI are actually capturing this content. We'll fine-tune the policy or enforcement guideline, and then it goes back to the machines and AI to actually capture this at scale. And so an example for us, and I'd certainly welcome a follow-up on your points about transparency, on a quarterly basis, and this is transparent, every quarter YouTube issues a report that summarizes the total number of videos that we remove because they violated our policy. Let's say that in the last quarter it was around 8 million. Of those 8 million videos, over 90% were caught by machines versus human flaggers. That is a necessary component to be a safer platform, is to allow for technology itself to actually get at this content. And on average, quarter over quarter, what we're seeing is well over 2/3 to 3/4 of that content that machines caught first versus human flags. 2/3 to 3/4 of that content is removed with less than 10 views, because it's actually important to remove it before the harm has occurred by people consuming it. And there's more that we're doing. It's in terms of how are we spotting whether or not content is synthetically altered to be realistic, making sure that we have disclosures on the videos or underneath the videos. How do we make sure these classifiers are not taking weeks or months to be precise? But with the improvements around AI and large language models, turning that into days and even hours at times. So I see it as just as important in being responsible as it is in general innovation and features and things of that nature.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Leslie. Please.
I have just 58 seconds, so I will try that. I absolutely agree. If we want to manage the problem, the amount of information is such huge that the only one solution is AI. That's clear. Ethically and legally, we know how to do that because in my former career, I am a soldier. And I know that, for example, when we speak about autonomous systems, we already work with that and we know how to use it with all the ethical and legal regulations and so on. So we have very similar ethical and legal regulation in military area, which is, let's say, we work with fatal instruments. So we can use these ethical norms, but what we need is will. And the question is, do we have the will?
Thank you very much. And that was a very punchy ending, unfortunately, to our panel. We have opened huge topics that philosophers of the last 2,000 years couldn't necessarily solve. But I think we got a lot closer thanks to our hour and a quarter that we just had here. To very quickly summarize, we have content consumers, we have content creators, and we have people in the middle who are trying to make our society work, whether that's the state or the private sector, or just everyday citizens. There is a fundamental distrust going on in that matrix right now. And the very clear thing is that people want transparency and they want to be able to make their own decisions. And what we need to do is to make sure that we safely, but also very, very transparently and clearly and simply communicate what we're doing to that information. So provenance of information, and I think the fusion of, for example, blockchain and AI-generated content is something that is on the horizon. We have Web3 that is on the horizon, where the attention does not necessarily equal value. We have a tendency towards decentralization of both the computing systems and of the way that technology and information is organized and distributed across the globe. But I think that what we can all agree on is, and allow me to quote my very favorite Captain Nemo from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne, is that we can brave human laws, but we cannot resist natural ones. So we humans are fundamentally irrational chimpanzees with iPhones, and we need to face up to that reality, and we need to make sure that all the information around us is as transparent, as safe as possible, so we can make data-driven decisions and not those necessarily based on just instinct. And that is the way that we can preserve our society, and digital democracy can help in that, whatever that means to each and every one of you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to all of our panelists. You've been absolutely fantastic. And thank you to all of you for a very riveting discussion on Slido as well. Give them all a round of applause, please. Thank you.